And I think that I'm the person to lead it for this riding, and I know I have a lot of people behind me and happy that I'm reoffering.
They're not going to see it as a levy, they're going to see it as a tax. And we are taxed to death in all, not only here, but all across the country. Doesn't matter what it is.
The party that both stands up for Canada and is ready to deal with Donald Trump will probably find favor. But our record is clear, and unlike the Liberals, we're not changing positions on everything.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look back at the top stories of the week from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
Nathalie, it's been a busy week to say the least.
Yeah, very busy in the news cycle for sure.
We will get to tariffs, whether they're in place, what's not in place, but we want to start on Campobello Island, where on Sunday we saw Mayor Harvey Matthews take his boat, my uptown girl, over to St. Andrews to pick up Johnston and Rebecca Haynes, two photographers from St. Andrews, to bring them to the island, bypassing the U.S. border, which is the only year-round way to get to the island with a car, is to cross into the U.S., drive 40 minutes through Maine, and take a bridge from Lubec, Maine, over to the island. Johnston and Rebecca don't have passports, so we saw that in real time. We saw two people and how they would get to Campobello, which had to be by boat. In the summer, there is a ferry that runs that way. But Harvey Matthews wanted to make sure Islanders had passports now that border restrictions are increasing. It used to be that you could have any proof of citizenship to cross over, and now with increased border restrictions, he's worried about Islanders who might have a harder time crossing. I'm just wondering what your impression was of seeing that. I know that you didn't live here at the time of COVID-19 when we saw the province step up and fund the ferry year-round to ensure that Islanders had a constant link to the mainland. But now we're seeing, under just tighter border restrictions, this need is back in the spotlight.
I think it's very interesting that, of the 900 or so residents that live on Campobello Island, about 100 of them needed updated passports or new passports, because this partnership has existed for so long. The friendship between America and Canada has existed for a very long time, and that kind of, honor system has existed between Campobello Island and Lubec, Maine. So I think it's very interesting. And what I think is very problematic, though, is that Campobello residents are not being afforded the opportunity to get home without going through a foreign country, which is something that is afforded to every other New Brunswicker. So we did ask some questions about that, but I think it'll be interesting to see if the federal government and the provincial government can come together and find a solution for folks on Campobello.
Definitely. It's one of those situations, too, where I think it's also a missed tourism opportunity. We talk about Islanders. There's always that argument that some people will make that if you choose to live on an island, life might be more difficult. But I think anyone who knows the island well can see what a gem it is to New Brunswick. When you go to the island in the summer, the majority of tourists are actually American because of FDR's ties to the island. That's where his summer home was, which has become the only international park in the world. I was at the 60th anniversary of the park last summer. We saw Sam Waterston from Law and Order, from Grace and Frankie, came up to be the voice of the film as well. So this is an island that draws not only tourists from all around the world, but notable people like Sam Waterston, Angus King, the senator from Maine, who's on the board of the park. So there really is so much special tourism over on the island that doesn't exist anywhere else. So I really think this is maybe an opportunity to revisit the ferry, not just as a need to Islanders, but as a place that I think New Brunswick should invest in as far as tourism goes too. So for anyone who hasn't been there, it is really one of the most beautiful places in New Brunswick, though we are a little biased. But we did have the chance to ask Premier Susan Holt about the unique challenges of the island and whether the province was willing to step up. But as you mentioned, the press conference had more to do with tariffs.
Yeah, she unveiled a very significant plan about how to respond to the tariffs, which we know have been scaled back in part. And it was a $162 million package, which we'll get into a little bit later in the show. But they definitely had some interesting questions about this plan and sort of the more specifics. So we'll let you take a listen to what journalists asked the Premier.
How much interaction are you expecting between yourself, your provincial colleagues, the federal government. Will this be a daily meeting that you'll be having, or how much contact, now that we're into this, are you expecting?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nick. We've been meeting weekly right now, as well as with considerable exchanges in between those Wednesday afternoon meetings. We have one today at 3 o'clock with the First Ministers to connect on this subject. And then my counterparts have been having very regular meetings on internal trade. We expect the federal government to communicate their support package to New Brunswick workers and Canadian workers. And we expect to continue that conversation. So at a minimum, on a weekly basis, we will be connecting with our federal counterparts and other premiers.
Thank you both. We're going to go back online. Sarah from Canadian Press, can you unmute your microphone and ask your question, please?
Hi there. You mentioned federal government support package. Can you tell me what are you hoping will be in there?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. We are expecting the federal government to provide capital measures to ensure that businesses have the working capital they need, similar to the package my colleague, Minister Randall, described. We're expecting supports to workers by changing the terms of EI. So we want to see a waiting period waived. We want to see enhancements to the EI program for folks impacted by tariffs so that they can get access to that income support quickly. And I think that there's a job sharing plan that's going to get changed. We're also looking for further supports for the kind of changes that New Brunswick businesses will need to make to access new markets and to move our goods instead of by train across the border with Maine where $12 billion goods pass, instead onto a shipping container and out the Port of St. John or the Port of Baldoon to reach customers in Europe or Africa or beyond. And so we're looking for infrastructure supports for market diversification, supports for workers through income and retraining, and capital supports for businesses.
Sarah, do you have a follow-up?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Madden from Global.
I know you've talked about the upcoming budget, but how much in total will these measures cost, and which budget are they looking out this year or the upcoming one?
The package that my colleagues have described totals about $162 million of support, and we have put that into next year's budget as conditional, so the programs are there to be used if needed for tariff-impacted sectors.
Follow-up?
I know there's talk about exploring new markets. What new markets are those, and how long do you see that taking?
Well, we've been working on exploring new markets for quite a bit of time, but I've never seen both more uptake or more energy behind the work. So we were just host to leaders from Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, where we have lots of opportunity to engage on seafood, on forestry, on cybersecurity, and other things. The Canada-European Trade Agreement that was signed back in 2016-17, I think, hasn't realized its full potential. And so there are lots of opportunities in Europe as Europeans wonder what tariffs are going to hit to them. They are keen to partner with strong and democratic nations like Canada to ensure that those values and those relationships are both economic and social. We're looking at markets in Asia, where that's the ultimate destination for much of New Brunswick seafood now, and we think that we can get direct to those markets on our own rather than using partners through the U.S. And then the African market has been changing dramatically, and so we look at what's happening in Africa and India and the Middle East, and we see demand for the kind of products that New Brunswickers make. They're very interested in our food products, our energy products, and some of our solutions. So really, the world is our oyster. The Europeans are ready with an existing trade agreement, and we have close access to them through our port infrastructure. But we have New Brunswick businesses doing business all around the world, and we're going to put in place even more supports to get them there, because their motivation to do so, when your easiest trading partner has now become your most difficult trading partner, the motivation is there to move and find those new customers. We provide a number of supports to businesses that are looking to diversify, and my colleague might be able to speak more to it, but we support their sales and marketing efforts. So as they send a salesperson over to a new market, then we can help offset the costs of that investment. As they stick their neck out to find new customers, we can help de-risk that. We have expertise in the team who can share information on regulatory barriers, the differences in doing business in other countries, because that knowledge exists in-house, and Opportunities New Brunswick Brunswick shares it freely. We leverage the Canadian embassy structure where we know the products that other countries want to buy. Then we can tee up group delivery and line up the logistics so that as many Canadian New Brunswick businesses want to go into that market, we can make it less expensive for them to do so by aligning the logistics costs to get into that marketplace. And then we can leverage the trade agreement that exists now that makes sure that there's free flow of trade and help them get their goods into our friends' hands.
Alexander Johnson from All New Brunswick. Can you unmute your mic and ask your question, please?
Good morning. I wanted to ask about the competitive growth plan fund specifically. My understanding is that is meant for larger companies. What can that money be spent on? Is that meant to just subsidize operations to keep things going, or is that going into investments to make businesses more competitive?
So it is intended to go into long-term competitiveness programs, but also bring short-term stability. So both. ONB has an existing assessment process. We certainly will be engaging that to make sure we're investing in long-term strategies to help businesses in the long term. Right now, there's a great deal of uncertainty. We're all feeling it. Business leaders are no exception. So this fund is there to help support them in terms of building their strengths, building New Brunswick's overall economic strength, and bringing long-term competitiveness. So a little bit of both.
Alexander, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some numbers when we were first having this conversation, either in early February or January. At the time, Premier, you said that these tariffs could cost New Brunswick between 4,000 and 6,000 jobs. What is that looking like today as far as potential job loss in the province?
Well, that's still the best forecast that we have, Alexander, that 4,000 to 6,000 range. We know that there's more than 35,000 jobs that are attached to our U.S. economic activity, but we don't expect that to go to zero today. The implementation of these tariffs doesn't mean that all purchasing stops. It just means that our competitive position with the U.S. is diminished, which may cause a reduction in revenue for businesses and the need to implement layoffs. So we're still estimating right now around 6,000 jobs that are at risk, and we will see how quickly the buying behaviors change. We know that the U.S. depends on our petroleum exports, our wood exports, our agriculture exports, and they don't have easy replacements for those things. If you're in Boston or if you're in Maine, your choice of where to get gas or how to heat your home, you don't have 10 different suppliers out there. And so the customers will continue to be there, and we're going to see and be ready to support any New Brunswicker whose job is impacted by these tariffs.
Thank you both. Vicki, Hogarth, CHCO-TV.
Thank you, Bruce. Premier Holt, this weekend, the mayor of Campobello transported 2 photographers to the island to help islanders update or get passports because of tightened borders, and even getting day-to-day supplies to the island is becoming increasingly more complicated. What's the latest update from the province on what you're doing to protect islanders who don't have a year-round ferry to date?
Thank you for the question, Vicki, because the people in Campobello are in a particularly challenging situation, and I thought the mayor's initiative to help people get passports was an excellent one, because we know that the ferry that currently operates from Deer Island is not available every day. It's not available when islanders need it. So we have to come up with the kind of access to New Brunswick that Campobello needs in order to meet their requirements as a part of New Brunswick. We can't get a new ferry there tomorrow. That's unfortunately not the speed of our response. But we were working with the mayor. The mayor was on a call that we held with border communities to articulate the issues, to flag the kind of supports available to him and to the other mayors along the border. And so those conversations and that collaboration is continuing.
A follow-up, Ms. Hogarth?
Thank you. And on that topic of border towns, in what ways do you anticipate New Brunswick's border towns will be uniquely affected by these tariffs? What were those conversations like with local leaders? What are their concerns?
At the time when we last talked with the mayors of the border communities, we were talking significantly about security, wondering about outmigration from the U.S. as more and more people were being pushed and deported, and whether that was impacting our communities. We were talking about the additional surveillance and monitoring that New Brunswick and the Canadian government had put on the border, the impact of the Blackhawks that some community members were seeing, of the drones, and of the additional monitoring we were doing, the need for additional personnel at a time when the U.S. was reducing their presence and their hours at border facilities. And so that was the main discussion at that point in time. But now we're looking at what might be the economic impacts, because we have a number of communities, Edmundston being one, clearly St. Stephen and others, where the economic ties are significant, where people move across the border to buy and shop, where pulp moves through a pipe from one side of the mill over to the other, that will have significant impacts on the economies of those communities, which is why we included a community support piece in the package that we described today, supported through RDC.
That was Premier Holt and some of her colleagues in Cabinet responding to questions from journalists about the plan to respond to U.S. tariffs. And MP John Williamson, we asked him about this conversation because there is a required partnership between the federal government and provincial government to operate this ferry year-round. And he had some interesting things to say about how that might work.
The Premier said today, while there seems to be heightened discussions about the ferry, there really isn't anything in place in terms of plans like there was in COVID. From your end, what are you hearing from constituents? Is the federal government, do you think, able to meet the province somewhere if this becomes a necessity soon?
Oh, this is where I think it's up to the Premier of New Brunswick, and I said the same thing to Blaine Higgs, to go to Ottawa and ask for a partnership. I discovered, because I looked, that the federal government supports interprovincial ferries in British Columbia. That same program should be extended to New Brunswick and the Campobello ferry, but it's going to take a strong premier to go to Ottawa and push for that deal.
That was New Brunswick Southwest MP John Williamson. And it is interesting that part of that package will be, protection for border communities, $5 million. But there was a lot of things that she included in that conversation. $33 million for post-secondary education, training, and labor for the nearly, between 4,000 to 6,000 jobs she anticipates potentially could be lost as a result of these tariffs. It's going to be a significant hit to the New Brunswick economy if these tariffs do come into place again on April 2nd. We're kind of in this back and forth, which again is not very stabilizing for the economy here.
It's interesting because we see April 2nd and maybe there's this small relief. I know where we're feeling that relief most is, again, over on the island. We had a lot of phone calls this week from Islanders, again, given that they go over to the U.S. to get a lot of their day-to-day essentials and bring it back. We had phone calls from people saying some border guards were easy about it. Other times they were pulled in and wondering if maybe there'd be an exemption for Islanders. So anyone on the island, we do want you to know we've reached out to CBSA to inquire if there are exemptions for Islanders. We've now been redirected to Canada's Finance Department to see what their perspective is on this. So we will continue to fight for answers, and hopefully with this new April 2nd deadline, again, on tariffs being put in place on the U.S. side, we'll have an answer before then. I feel that's the relief I feel right now from the delay is I'm assuming in about 3 weeks' time, we will be back in this same position. Some of the interesting effects of it, though, I think, are that American alcohol has been pulled off the shelves at MB Liquor. We've seen similar things happen across the country in other provinces. So there are these effects that are in place, whether the tariffs are imposed or not. It's changed people's habits as well. I noticed myself, I haven't been over on the U.S. side. It used to be something I did quite regularly, whether it was going out for dinner because you have more options or just being a part of the two communities. We used to see them more as one, but this definitely changed a lot of habits for people in the region.
And it is important to note that these tariffs, while have been kind of reversed a bit, are not entirely gone. No. So part of the agreement is that the imports under the USMCA, which is the agreement that succeeded NAFTA, those are the only imports that are now currently exempt from tariffs. So that only accounts for 38% of Canadian imports, 50% in Mexico. So while Canadians may be feeling a bit of relief, it is a smaller amount of relief that they should be feeling, because potentially it's not everything that they would have been expecting, as part of this trade war.
I thought it was interesting too that when Premier Holt kicked off the conference on March 4th, she really made a point of stressing these are illegal tariffs, showing how they feel about what's being imposed on them. And I know that U.S. President Donald Trump has said a lot of this is to stop drug flow across the borders, but we know from data that really it's a very small amount of fentanyl, 0.2%
less than
that
1%.
crosses from Canada into the U.S. So a lot of question marks about what's the real motivation for these tariffs. And I think that has everyone from our Premier to our Prime Minister to regular people feeling very uncertain, but in that uncertainty, finding new habits and new ways to go forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this will be a true test of the relationship between the two allies of Canada and the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, for that matter. We can only wait and see what happens between the two of us.
I know that we're both wearing red today. I think that sometimes your patriotism, sometimes it can just be a subconscious act that makes you make even a fashion choice. What else from the Courier, when you're looking back at the top stories of the week, was one that readers really responded to that seemed to be performing well?
Well, I would like to talk about St. Stephen in particular. We've talked about Campobello Island, but St. Stephen is also a border community. And the two communities, St. Stephen and Calais, are intimately connected to each other. Some people work across the border, some people work in Canada. Their economies are tied as well. And so in that conversation that we had with Premier Holt earlier, and you might have heard the question that Vicki, you asked about the conversation between the mayors and the Mayor's Border Alliance, which is mayors that exist across the country that live in border communities. And she was talking about, initially that conversation was about out-migration, so potentially people who are living in the U.S. illegally coming across the border into Canada. And, seeing these Black Hawk helicopters that the RCMP are deploying, increased law enforcement at the border as well. Again, we saw Campobello Island residents noticing that as well. All of these things were of great concern to border communities at the outset prior to this conversation about tariffs. And so it is something that people are watching and paying attention to, and it is actually maybe making people nervous. So that is on my mind, and we're continuing to follow that story and have that conversation. But I think what's interesting now is they are more worried about the economic impact of these tariffs as opposed to that out-migration conversation. I think it's still on the table, but I think it's shifted a bit to the more economic impact.
And Holt put forward a $162 million relief package relating to tariffs. We are expecting, as she said, around 6,000 jobs across the province to be potentially impacted by this. Different industries will be hit harder than others. And part of that relief package was towards border communities and the impacts they might feel. I also think that there could potentially be silver linings to this as well. Oftentimes you see people in our region go across the border to buy quite a large number of groceries, to go shop. I mean, Martin's it's an institution in this part of the world. I think you see a Martin's bag in our community almost every day, but those habits are changing too. People are finding ways to support on their side of the border.
Well, and it might be hard to quantify really how St. Stephen may benefit from Calais' population and vice versa. I think it might be hard to quantify that and bring it forward, but I think folks will notice a difference on both sides of the border now that Canadians are choosing to shop local and shop Canadian. I think that they will start to notice a difference.
And while I think it's very different circumstances, we can look back at that data from the time of COVID-19 when we saw Canadians discover their own country. And the beauty of this part of the world, it is a summer destination. So we're likely to see in the coming months those bookings come up. I know I've heard from a number of accommodation providers in St. Andrews specifically that have some of their bookings, especially for July and August, already full. We've also heard from a number of real estate agents that they're seeing an uptick in Americans buying property on this side as well, and whether that's just for seasonal escapes or for a more permanent relocation. It's interesting to follow these trends as well, and all the different ways you can look at data when there is something that has these international implications, whether it be a pandemic or in this case a trade war, to see where people's decisions take the economy.
And some of you may have noticed that Mayor Alan McEachern, who is the mayor of St. Stephen, has appeared on CTV Atlantic and CBC New Brunswick, talking about the very real impact that these tariffs and these extra security measures are going to have on his community. And we have on a number of occasions asked him to come participate in our show, Your Town Matters, which is a show that we do with some of the mayors in Charlotte County, talking about their communities and the issues that really impact them, and that has yet to happen. So we hope that he will come and sit down with us at CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent local community television. We really would like to have that conversation with him in this most pivotal time for his community.
Yes, and I feel that our audience is so hyper-local that it really is a great opportunity to you can speak to a wider audience on CTV, but here offers you that opportunity to speak to the residents of Southwest New Brunswick and give them an idea of what's happening and how the path is going forward. When we bring it back to local, to municipal, which is really the bread and butter of what we do here at CHCO, what have been some of the recent council highlights? What are some of the stories you look at that are coming out of council right now?
There's a lot going on with council right now. St. Stephen, sticking with St. Stephen, if you don't mind, there's a tourism accommodation levy that's happening over there. They're considering it. They haven't brought it to council yet, but there were some presentations that took place, one presentation and then one public comment about this tourism accommodation levy. And it sort of seemed from the presentation that perhaps there was a concern that this might be an extra tax. And businesses especially are dealing with a lot lately. The cost of electricity, the cost of doing business is much greater. And so it sort of seemed there was a frustration about how they were going to include this. But tourism accommodation levies exist almost everywhere where accommodations exist. And Joe Moffat, the owner of the Oak Bay Campground, presented to council on his thoughts about the tourism accommodation levy.
As you all know, that I have a long-term lease at the Oak Bay Community, I was going to say the Oak Bay Community Hall, sorry. Just another issue on the campground in Oak Bay. And we've had a 10-year lease at first, and we're into a second long-term lease. And I'm very grateful, and we've taken it from a closed business to what it is today. And then I'm battling things every day you wouldn't believe, but I guess that's life. So with this, you will see three numbers. Those are the past three seasons, 22, 23, and 24. You will see the caption overnight sales. And then you're going to see a 3.5 roughly proposed levy that you are entertaining. I realize they're still in the entertainment process. So I'm trying to give you guys some insight as to some of this. If you look at those numbers for the last 3 years, out of what I would have collected, and the way this overnight sales is broken down is we have a number of categories. We have monthly rents, weekly rents, daily rents, so on and so on, and seasonal rents. No. Okay. Just take the first number, 2022, and take the number across from it. That only reflects overnight stays under 30 days. Okay, same as the other two numbers. So we've taken them from our accounting and broke them out. This will give you an idea of what I will be paying you roughly if this levy is going through. But I don't know about all the other people. I don't know how many other organizations that do overnights. I do know of one I've called, and I know of a second one that I've called. One particular one, I'm not saying any of their names, however, was really upset over this, didn't know anything about this was going on. I explained to her the best that I could about what is being proposed. This person is already decided to add a levy on U.S. customers per night. And I don't agree with that, but that's not up to me. That's the way this person wants to run their particular business. I like to bring people to this community. As you all know, I grew up in Milltown, was born in Milltown, grew up in St. Stephen, went to every school in the country, sold ATVs. I've been here my whole life. I've been an advocate for this county. We've got 23 names up there that now are all amalgamated, and we all represent all these places. That's a lot of places. We start putting charges on people coming to our community to stay for a week, because I'll be honest with you, I get a lot of people that come for a week at a time because they have family. Now I've got to charge them, even though they used to live here. Now I got to charge them a levy. Don't agree. Last year we had people that would pay for 1 month. Their contract would be renewed to work. They'd stay another month, and then so on and so forth. And now this levy is going to affect them. My concerns are that these increases are going to, it's not a lot, I understand that. Like if you had a $40 a night rate, you're talking $1.40 or something. I have invoices that are pre-printed from the St. Croix Printing Club for probably up to another 4 years or so. Now, according to the information that I'm receiving, is I'm going to have to take those, scrap them, start again. So in other words, I'm going to have my charge, say, we'll just say rough numbers, $35 for an overnight, provincial tax, your levy, tax, or accordingly. Then I have to collect it. I have to house it. I have to account for it. I have to bank it. Every quarter, I have to bring it into you. And then at the end of the year, I have to do more accounting work because this is on top of other things. It's a nightmare. So my property tax assessments for the last X years have gone up anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 every year at the campground, and we have not expanded. We have not put up new buildings. We have not done anything. My insurance is absolutely astronomical, and I have to pay that. That's $20,000 to $30,000 a year. Hydro, when you want to go there, it's getting crazy. And now we want to do this. We're going backwards, not forward. I could understand if this was $100,000 a year that you might bring in, or $200,000, but you're not going to get those kind of numbers. These are accurate numbers that I'm giving you off of my accounting. This year has not been completed yet. Well, yes, that number will go in for this year. Okay? So if you look at this, and then if you just average, let's say Winsome Inn, let's average, say, $40 a night. Roughly, how many nights will they rent over a year? If you took the bed and breakfasts, there's 3 or 4 in the community. They pretty well shut down during the summer or the winter time, similar to me. You might take in $100,000 total, and if you average the 3.5%, you're going to get $3,500 out of that. That's what you guys would make. Is it worth it? I don't see it even being remotely, I wouldn't even be considering it for that kind of money. Hell, I'll give you the $3,500 to leave us all alone. You know what I mean? That's, to me, it's just, it's crazy. So last year, again, I'd have people that are moving to St. Stephen. So they've already done their processes. They've got their real estate done. They got everything else. They have no place to stay. They've lugged all their equipment, everything they own, in the back of a car or whatever, and they got a little pop-up tent trailer, and they're staying with us for, let's say, 30 days. Their house doesn't get ready. They renew another 30 days. And I have to put a tourism levy on top of this. What are we telling that person? What are we telling people that, because every customer that comes to St. Stephen, when they come to my place, we promote this town. I want them to come here. Some ask to go to St. Andrews, and I do my best to be a tourism person for there too. But if I'm charging this and you want it broken out, if they start seeing this and then they say, well, what's this fee for? And I say, well, it's my community that's charging it. I can't do anything about it. What are we telling them? We're not telling them to come back to town. I teach the people who work for me that if they do a good job when the people cross that border and they stop at my place for the first night and they're going into the Maritimes, if I do the right job, then I will get them coming back through to go back across the border. So we work hard at it, and I'm very picky with my staff to say, make sure you do it. And you ask my wife, there's been a couple of times I've had arguments with her, you know, because I want it done a certain way. I want them to come back. It's money in my pocket. So I made so many notes here. I was trying to think of everything that I could tell you, but I think I've pretty well told you a lot of it about. I don't, personally, I think it's absurd to try to charge another levy or another tax. They're not going to see it as a levy, they're going to see it as a tax. And we are taxed to death in all, not only here, but all across the country. Doesn't matter what it is. So on average, I don't like the idea. I think it's wrong. I really do. If anybody should be making any more money, it should be me, not you.
That was Joe Moffat of the Oak Bay Campground. We'll be right back with This Week Uncut.
I think the same way for leadership. I think at this time, who is the best person to lead us through this, that has the experience, and I believe it's Mark Carney.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
Well, that was quite a presentation, Nathalie, that Joe Moffat gave at St. Stephen Council. Can you tell us a little bit about what was Council's reaction? It was also a full house in terms of the audience for the number of the public who was there.
There's a lot of very civically engaged folks here in Charlotte County, especially in St. Stephen, people who are paying attention to local decision makers, and I think that's very important. And that room was full. There was maybe one or two seats that didn't have anybody in them. So, but I did speak to Mayor McEachern about that presentation by telephone, and he was receptive, right? He thinks that these perspectives, both by Mr. Moffat and later on Ms. Thomas, are important to the conversation, to understanding what needs to take place in order to implement this tourism accommodation levy. And it's worth noting that this tourism accommodation levy is modeled after the two that already exist in Charlotte County. One is in St. George, and I want to preface this by saying it's St. George, not Eastern Charlotte, and one that exists in St. Andrews. And people will know that St. Andrews has a very significant hotel, the Algonquin Resort. But that rate is set at 3.5%, which is exactly what St. Stephen wants to set theirs at. And this conversation is likely happening now in advance of a hotel being set up in St. Stephen. But there's a long history there about a hotel and sort of what's taking place at that plot of land by the Garthland Civic Center.
I think as we see the world's oldest basketball court, which is right by the Garthland as well, come to fruition, there is that need for the hotel to grow at the same time, because we're seeing St. Stephen become this bigger tourism destination with the world's oldest basketball court. There has been a lot of a conversation about when will this hotel come to fruition by the Garthland Civic Center, right by the waterfront. But if they are discussing a tourism levy at this point in time, I think that's maybe a pretty good sign that maybe something will be happening in the near future. And we've seen it successfully implemented in St. Andrews, where, like you mentioned, the Algonquin Resort would be the biggest player in terms of its contributions to the levy. But all the smaller inns, and I think even the Airbnbs, contribute to this pot that we now see in the community as Explore St. Andrews, which offers the community a significant amount of funds to do their own tourism, which can go towards advertising campaigns, to hiring full-time staff. They have an executive director at Explore St. Andrews who works with the Chamber of Commerce and the community to attract people to the area.
And I think there is, council will tell you that they are using some of their budget money towards tourism and the promotion of St. Stephen. But I don't think that they have as much breadth and capacity as St. Andrews, for example, because they don't have that tourism accommodation levy, but they also don't have the accommodation to match, right? If they're implementing it now, the scope of the amount of accommodations they have is very small. They might not get a significant amount of money, but in the event that a hotelier pops up and offers to build a hotel, it could be a very significant pot of money that could be used to promote St. Stephen in a point in time when promoting yourself on the Canadian side is going to be very important for the future of your economy.
Yes, it will be interesting to follow that story. I can understand the perspective of especially a small inn owner and what maybe that might do to the clientele, especially if you have regular clientele and you have to now introduce an added expense to it. You can understand the frustrations, but I can also see where maybe there is a hotel coming in the years ahead to the community, why they're having these discussions now.
And I think that, everything that those tourism operators and those accommodation operators said is very valid. They all have unique sets of circumstances under which they operate. And these folks have been champions of tourism for St. Stephen and Charlotte County for a long time. So hopefully they will be able to take some of this information and inform a bylaw that they do eventually pass.
We've had quite a week. We are going to jump into federal politics very soon in this show. We do focus a lot on municipal, but there was an announcement that happened on Monday night. Karen Ludwig, who was the MP for New Brunswick Southwest from 2015 to 2019, has thrown her hat back in the ring. She is the acclaimed Liberal candidate for the upcoming federal election. She made that announcement on Monday, and then she came to the studio to talk with us about her decision and what brought her back into politics. Let's take a look.
What I'm hearing from people in our area, as well as friends in other parts of the country, I do think Canadians are starting to look at politics a little differently. I think what's most important on the election day is who is the best person, who is the best person to lead our country to stronger economic independence, as well as a stronger country. And I think that, to me, I'm hoping that people put country before politics, and I do see more of a movement on that. And when familiar faces like mine come back, it shows that we do have confidence that we can do better and that we will do better. But I would say the only way we can do this better is if we do it together. Stop the internal fighting. We work on interprovincial trade. We drop those trade barriers. We work with business to build a stronger economy. And only at that point can we continue with, investing in social programs. We have, I would say, in the last couple of terms, it has not been balanced. And in order to be able to afford the great social safety net that Canada has always valued, we do need a stronger, more independent economy. And I think that I'm the person to lead it for this riding. And I know I have a lot of people behind me and happy that I'm reoffering.
You're making this announcement before they picked a new leader of the Liberals. Do you have confidence in one particular candidate over another? Does it matter to you who comes out on top?
I do obviously have a preference, and I have voted. I think all four candidates, my hat goes off really to all four. I know all four of them. Frank was actually my seatmate who sat in front of me. Krista is on the same floor as I was, and she gave me a lot of autonomy when it came to the steel and aluminum tariffs in Washington. So I think any one of them would be good, but I do have a preference. But I think the same way for leadership. I think at this time, who is the best person to lead us through this that has the experience? And I believe it's Mark Carney. And I did not make the decision lightly to run again. I did meet with him. I asked him very specific questions about our riding in particular, and said in 2019, I was personally impacted by the last minute changes that the Prime Minister did during the writ period, when they were policy suggestions that didn't materialize, but they impacted us directly. And so it was very difficult to run in 2019 throughout that campaign. And when I've spoken with others that are running for leadership, they've assured me that that will not be the case. And some of those changes that are really policies for urban ridings are not going to be impacting us in this election in rural ridings like ours that are such treasures.
That was Karen Ludwig, the Liberal candidate for the riding of St. John, St. Croix in the next federal election. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back after this.
We're against the carbon tax. We're for pipeline expansions. We're for getting our natural resources to markets. All issues the Liberals were on the wrong side of the last 10 years.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And it was interesting to talk to Karen about re-entering politics in this very strange era that we're in terms of federal politics, even provincial politics and municipal politics. Ludwig ran for the first time in 2015, and she's been the only Liberal to convert that seat since 1997. But the riding has a history of kind of going between the Conservatives and the Liberals, so it's not unlike Charlotte County voters to maybe choose one or the other, but it will be interesting to see who comes out on top this time.
Mm-hmm. We always have an exciting Meet the Candidates event, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal. So we are gearing up to do Meet the Federal Candidates. Last time we did it was in the time of COVID-19, so I'm really excited about having an in-person audience again. This will be our first time doing this with us. It is honestly it's how people tell us they make their decisions, which I really love to hear from the community. Part of that comes from the fact that we involve you at home. We get all our questions from the public. So once we know the date of the election, we'll be putting those calls out there. Start thinking about them now. I'm sure as we see especially things like tariffs change on a dime, your questions might change as well. So keep them coming in. You can reach us always at the email news@chco.tv, but we will put a special call out for questions from the public as we get closer to knowing when that date of the federal election is. I can tell you from moderating events before that featured both Ludwig and Williamson, it makes for a really interesting debate. They both bring a lot to the table with different perspectives on different issues, but it makes for a really exciting Meet the Candidates night. So that's what I'm excited about, knowing that Karen Ludwig is re-entering. John Williamson will be in this next federal election as well. I've been in the room before when they've both been at the table, and it is very exciting.
It will be interesting to see how this next federal election unfolds. Both Ludwig and Williamson talked about civility and the need for civility as this process unfolds. And it's going to be interesting to see how Canadians choose their next leader and their next government in this very tumultuous time that we're living in. So commend to anyone who puts their name on the ballot as well. I think it's a difficult time to step up in politics.
We talked to John Williamson as well once he learned the news that Karen Ludwig would be in the race. Here's what he had to say. What are your thoughts on this announcement?
Well, look, we're obviously going to have an election very soon. I certainly welcome Karen into this race, and it's going to be an interesting race because we now all have records to run on. For example, in 2016, Karen voted against a motion in the House of Commons that would have eliminated the interprovincial trade barriers. She voted against that. She voted in favor of the Liberals' gun registry. She voted in favor of Bill C-69, the No New Pipeline Bill, which is causing big problems today as we face the threat from the United States. We have no other market for our oil products. So this is going to be a good election, a great debate, and I welcome Karen and all other candidates to join.
Obviously, we're hearing news of the tariffs from the United States, as you mentioned. How do you think this changes Canadians' priorities going forward and what's important for different parties to focus on?
Well, look, it makes an election more necessary. We have to have a prime minister with a mandate. We have a prime minister now who is a lame duck. We've lost more than a month when we could have been dealing with Donald Trump. We are now caught with these tariffs. And even the new Liberal leader, when he comes in, or she, when he or she comes in a week, won't have a mandate to deal with Donald Trump. So I think an election is likely, and I think the party that both stands up for Canada and is ready to deal with Donald Trump will probably find favor. But our record is clear, and unlike the Liberals, we're not changing positions on everything. We're against the carbon tax, we're for pipeline expansions, we're for getting our natural resources to markets, all issues the Liberals were on the wrong side of the last 10 years. Canadians are unified. We're seeing that from coast to coast. We're seeing that even sovereigntists now are embracing the flag. We're seeing Albertans who are all in as well. So I think that's happening. I think it's already happened. Next, Canadians are going to choose a prime minister who they will give the mandate to deal with Donald Trump. And I think our leader's ready for that job. He's not going to have to change any positions, unlike the Liberals and the Liberal leader.
We are seeing people online more polarized than ever, whether it's Canadians and Americans, Canadians versus Canadians. How do we navigate that kind of climate while going into election as we appear to algorithms taking over and making people more divided?
Well, it's a good point. There's no doubt that this is a very political and partisan environment. Justin Trudeau left us in a terrible position. He should have left 6 months ago, giving the Liberals more time to pick a leader, and then having an election if they thought that was necessary. They didn't do that. Instead, we've got one lame duck leader who's on his way out, another prime minister who's coming in who's never been elected dog catcher in this country. I obviously think Mark Carney's going to win. So none of them have popular mandates. We need a leader that can deal with these problems now. But unfortunately, an election is going to take 6 to 8 weeks as well. So Canada's stuck right now. We need to have a strong government and a strong response to Donald Trump. But I think once we get through that, Canadians will be unified behind the Canadian flag. I know I will be.
That was MP Williamson of New Brunswick Southwest. As you said, Nathalie, it is really interesting to hear both candidates emphasizing civility, especially at this time that we're living in, when you go on Facebook and when you go into any given comment section, if it touches on politics, it seems to be just polarized opinions. But always the thing that bothers me most is when you see people taking shots that are below the belt, throwing mud, be it at the candidates or be it at each other. I prefer to have a more civil conversation when we're talking politics, and hopefully that could be another silver lining of a lot of the chaos we're seeing internationally right now. Is I think Canadians are really expressing a need to take the temperature down, to get back to talking about things that matter and in a way that's productive.
And I think the issues will be the most important thing to Canadians in this next federal election: affordability, crime, mental health, healthcare in general. All of these things will be very important to Canadians when they're looking to choose someone to represent them in Ottawa. Affordability is a really big one. Everyone understands the pressures, the financial pressures that a lot of Canadians are experiencing, especially in New Brunswick, where the poverty levels are a bit higher. Energy poverty levels are extremely high. So all of these things will be something that I think Canadians will be focused on. And I think given the rhetoric in the U.S., they will want their candidates to be focused on the issues that are impacting them the most, as opposed to attacking each other.
Yeah, these are conversations that we're having right now. Well, there's this push right now to support Canadian, even to buy made in New Brunswick. When we put these conversations out to the public, a lot of what we hear back is, it's about affordability. At the end of the day, if something becomes astronomically expensive, even if it means supporting local, that hurts a lot of people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And it's become quite the norm in the middle class to live paycheck to paycheck. And if that's one issue that I think everyone needs to be listening to right now.
Hardworking Canadians will be paying attention to what the candidates are going to say, either in debates that we moderate or debates that other broadcasters moderate. I think they will be paying very close attention to what they have to say, particularly on the affordability issue, but also healthcare, education, those sorts of things.
So Nathalie, what are you looking ahead at in terms of stories for this coming week and the weeks ahead?
Yeah, so we're looking at a few things in terms of St. Andrews Council. I'm not willing to give everything away today, but we're looking at St. Andrews is considering handing over its heritage permitting process and management. That will be an interesting conversation to kind of delve into, as St. Andrews is its downtown core is a national historic district, and heritage is very important to the folks who live here and call this place home. So we'll continue to watch that story. The other thing is that we're watching some provincial news as well. Dr. Yves Legier has been named the New Brunswick Chief Medical Officer of Health after former Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Jennifer Russell, went on to pursue other things in her career. So yeah, we're watching a few things, but we're going to keep some things close to the belt.
I will be heading to the border to see how people in both Calais and St. Stephen are uniting during this tumultuous time, as well as hopefully getting over to Campobello Island this week. And I know with the April 2nd delay of tariffs being imposed, that gives us a little bit of a safety period to deal with, to get some more answers from the federal government about exemptions for islanders. But we do want to hear directly from people living on Campobello Island about what they're going through right now as they navigate these tariffs in a very unique way.
That's the beauty of having your local television station and paper in your community, is you can tell your stories to us and we can bring those to the larger audience in New Brunswick.
Oh, yes. And again, so if you do want to give us any information, insight for stories we're working on or be a part of them, offer yourself as a subject for an interview, you can reach everyone on our news team at the email address news@chco.tv. It gets forwarded to all four of us who work full-time at CHCO. It's a small team, but we make magic happen.
Yeah, every week we make magic happen, the show included. So,
thank you for joining us today on This Week Uncut. We'll see you next time. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.